Ladies and gentlemen, theys and thems, I am your host, Lynae Vanee, and welcome back to another episode of The People's Brief. If you've been even a little bit aware of the news lately, then I'm sure you've seen the constant, relentless, inhumane abuse Trump has inflicted on immigrants, particularly those in the Latino community. We've seen an attack on Latino people that has torn families apart, devastated communities, and literally cost some people their lives, all in the name of xenophobia and racism. So on this episode of The People's Brief, we're tapping into a conversation around Latino people living in America and how they fit into this dumpster fire we call American politics. Now, other groups are facing similar atrocities to their immigrant populations, but what sets Latinos apart at this point in history is that almost half of their electorate voted for a candidate who promised to attack them for years. I mean, he literally put the playbook on the World Wide Web. It's baffling, especially when you consider the work that was done to avoid this. Latino voting advocacy groups, research studies on that demographic of voters, even Latino people with boots on the ground trying to get people registered to vote. Whole time, people like this man were registering Trump supporters to vote the whole time and didn't even know it.
You need to leave.
No, I'm sorry. Let's bring it back. I don't want to point any fingers. But there is something to be said about a candidate being able to convince almost half of such a culturally rich, resilient group of people to vote against their own interests. And of course, across the country, that voter turnout has had implications for Latino people and Black people alike, which is always inevitable. The Black and Latino communities have always had an intertwined, yet often contentious relationship on American soil. Both marginalized, ostracized, and brutalized, but yet we still haven't quite figured out how to get on the same page. Tonight, though, we make a little bit more progress on that mission by examining how our history aligns, the way American politics have driven stakes between us, and how their plight is also ours to share. Because at the end of the day, both of our communities have been walking parallel tightrope since our arrival on this land. And when we look past each other, we see the same threat looming behind us both. So whatever tensions may exist, when we both step into that voting booth, we should have similar goals, right? But what's keeping us from that? And how have politics been distorted to make sure it stays that way? Let's get into it right here, right now, on The People's Brief. And my thing is, all this contention between our communities strikes me as quite contrary. European invention is literally the reason our communities share so many similarities culturally and historically. We family. We go together real bad. Our shared experiences span generations, with our ancestors both toiling under the oppressive weight of slavery and colonization. So I think it's time for a little bit of a history lesson. While the legacy of chattel slavery is mainly associated with the United States, the first enslaved Africans to arrive in the Americas weren't those brought to Virginia in 1619. It was those who were brought to Hispaniola, now known as the Dominican Republic and Haiti, in 1502. It was an onslaught after that, with settlers pouring into Puerto Rico, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Hispaniola, and Cuba. Just like the origins of America, a desperate pursuit of wealth and power on stolen land led European colonizers to first demand the indigenous populations to supply labor for their burgeoning plantation economy. Disease and famine, along with mass killings and poor working conditions, ensured the dissipation of the native people in just a few decades. Between 1492 and 1542, the population of Arawak and Taino people in Hispaniola fell from 500,000 to just 500. Mexico lost nearly 90% of its population, and the Brazilian Amazon, the population dropped by over 95%. It's known as the Great Dying, the loss of human life that is so great that is linked to a drop in climate temperature referred to as the Little Ice Age. Yeah, they've been on this global destruction tip a long, long time. And that's how the transatlantic slave trade emerged. Over the next 2 centuries, 8 million plus enslaved Africans were trafficked into Latin America and the Caribbean. But it isn't just a shared history of colonialism and slavery that connects our communities. After generations of both working to liberate themselves from the oppressive grind of white supremacy, Black people and Latinos have created cultures that pierce the national consciousness, with such cultural and social impact on countries that would rather see us disappear. Here in America, that means we see the same harmful rhetoric that's been spun about us from jump. Egregious criminalization, police brutality, systemic oppression through violence and exploitation, resulting more often than not in Black and brown folks sharing the spot at the bottom of the hierarchical pyramid. What I'm saying is, the white man has done a number on us all. And yet, Despite the deep cultural connections between the two groups of people, there is an intense disdain and deep-seated racism that divides us. So much so that we saw nearly 50% of Latino voters turn out for Donald Trump in the 2024 election, even though he ran a campaign fueled by racism and a promise to target Latino communities. It is quite dismaying, to say the least. And the two communities would do well to understand that there is far more that connects us than divides us. So we need to get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing. And what's that, you ask? Being kind to one another. So what happens when lies are louder than the truth? When fear is weaponized and entire communities are misled, not by accident, but by design. What's happening now isn't just an immigration issue. It's a blueprint, one that banks on confusion, mistrust, and the silence between neighbors, family even. Right now, Latino voters, particularly men, are being targeted with misinformation and false promises designed to fracture coalitions and create confusion. It's not just political, it's strategic. And it doesn't just affect the brown community, because when one group is misled, both Black and brown people pay the price. To help us unpack how white supremacy pits Black and brown communities against each other, what it costs us all, and who really benefits from the divisiveness, are Latino voices from across the interwebs.
I think it's important to recognize that there is severe internalized colonialism, severe internalized racism, right? Colorism through the roof. You will have darker skinned folk saying, oh no, I'm not Black, I'm Cuban. Oh no, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. Oh no, you know, and granted there is a massive push as of the last few years for this acceptance of Blackness within Afro-Latino spaces. And this like, no, negro sí soy, right? Yes, I am Black and Cuban, or I'm Black first, Cuban second, you know, those kinds of things. But that is not the norm. Being Cuban American in Miami is a really interesting position. And I say that because folks who are non-Latino, and even folks maybe that are not necessarily of Cuban descent, are very shocked when they find out that a lot of white Cubans are like, Cubans for Trump, Hispanics for Trump, we want borders, are very shocked when that happens. Many of us are not. And the reason for that is because you have to understand the history. Where the Cuban Revolution happened, right? Who were the people who were exiled? And I say this as my grandparents were exiled. The people that were exiled are the people who had wealth, who were white, who were Spaniard, who were of Portuguese descent, had old money and new money. These are the people that were exiled. And so these people, not everybody was of the same, you know, positionality, but these are the people who created, who essentially kind of formed the foundation of identity politics and political ideologies in Miami, right? It's important to understand that context, because just like these people did not see themselves as people of color, they still don't see themselves as people of color. They were told, don't worry about you and your family, don't worry about your legal status, don't worry about, you know, any kind of impacts to you all. These are the people who we really are trying to target, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, it's this false promise of, oh, no, you're good, you're safe, we need your vote, you're good, it's everybody else. And that really plays into this historically ingrained into our bones proximity to whiteness. And I'm not talking about proximity to whiteness as we know it as a US perspective or a US concept. I'm talking proximity to whiteness that has been ingrained into our marrow for the last 500 years. Because as it happened here, it happened in the Latin Caribbean, it happened in the Caribbean, it happened in South America, Central America, all the Americas, right? This idea of, right, what ended up being the separation and the reduction in solidarity between enslaved African peoples and indentured servants was, hey, this rhetoric of, you may be poor, but you're not Black. And that has not only impacted, right, the US, it is also very entrenched and a huge foundation to the identity politics and the isms in the Latin Caribbean and in the Latin Americas, right? And the Latin countries. And all of that gets brought over.
They tell us that Democrats and anyone else who votes for Democratic candidates are lazy and just want to feed off of the system. They tell us that anyone who believes in big government or government handouts is not like us, hardworking people. Republicans know very well that we have attached so much of our identity and personal value to hard work, because we're taught from a very early age to work hard, keep our head down, don't question the boss, be uber grateful as an immigrant for just the fact that you're here, and don't question anything, don't ask for help. And so they tell us that everybody else is not like us, hardworking, except for them. And they tell us that Republicans are hard workers and they believe in hard work and they believe in businesses. And Democrats are just, again, lazy, feeding off of the system, and they hate businesses. And because we're so busy working hard, providing for our family, not taking the time to question the systems, we start believing them. Instead of asking, well, why do we have to work so hard when you get to go over there and play golf? Why do we have to bootstrap our businesses when you get to have private investors and government subsidies and government contracts? Why is it so bad for people to receive government support when the government supports businesses all the time, particularly big businesses with incentives and tax breaks and subsidies? They romanticize our struggles and tell us that we've earned everything on our own, so we are just like them.
We're joined here by Fresco Steez of Dream Defenders. Welcome to the show, Fresco.
Hey, how you doing, Lynae?
Good, good, good.
Good.
Dream Defenders is an organization dedicated to fighting for freedom, safety, and a good life for all. Fresco is here to help us further unpack just how detrimental this is for Black and Brown communities. It's a deep dive into identity, solidarity, and the work ahead to build a future that truly includes us all. All right, let's get into it. First things first, can you talk to the people about what Dream Defenders does and what you do for Dream Defenders?
Yeah, so Dream Defenders is a political formation for young Black folks, young Black and Brown working class folks who want to get involved in their community. They want to build power at the community level and create a transformative change that our communities actually feel. And we do that through organizing, through confronting local powers, power on a local and national level, and working to push that power to make the change that we want to see in the world.
Okay, fantastic. And you're the communications director.
Yes, I'm the communications director at Dream Defenders. So I am helping the organization make meaning of different political moments that we're seeing right now.
And what's the meaning you're finding now? Could you give us a temperature check on the ground, what it looks like?
Across the country, Black and Brown folks are building collective consciousness around the fact that we're in crisis and we are losing political power. And when we lose political power, we lose safety, we lose access to the resources that folks need to survive. And I think that right now, folks are scrambling, folks are afraid, and folks are trying to find the root of the problem. And we're seeing a lot of folks blame each other for the reason why we got to this moment. And hopefully we can take some of the momentum, the fear, the energy that people are feeling and turn that into power that we can use to organize against the folks that don't want us to exist in their future, in their vision of the future.
And I love that you said that we are building collective conscious. At the same time, the blame game is getting thrown here and there. And I think it's so important for us to, I made a post on social media for this episode trying to get more Latino voices in the conversation because I didn't want it to feel one-sided. But even in doing that, in my best effort in trying to extend the olive branch, I even realized how some of the questions the Black community has is tied up within the Black experience, and we're just unaware of some things that go on, and not just the Latino community as a whole, but even taking a step back to recognize that there are so many different sects of the Latino community who feel different ways about different things and have different priorities. So, even from the top of this episode, we can talk about Latino communities, or we can talk about our perspective being about Latino communities being misled, but that rhetoric is so varied throughout, and we can't just group people up in one piece. And so I could go on and on about the amount of things that I've learned, but I wonder, in doing work, being in solidarity and in partnership with Brown communities every day, what are some things that you think that you've learned or taken away that maybe previously you weren't thinking about, a light bulb that went off maybe?
So when we as Black folks talk about the Latinx community or the Latinx vote, and we often use that interchangeably with Hispanic. One of the things that I feel like is most important that I have learned is that when we're talking about Latinx folks, we're talking about Black folks. Where there are so many, because of colonization, because of imperialism, and the way that South America has been controlled. There are so many different identities and cultures within this one umbrella of Latinx or Hispanic. And so when we try to other or distance ourselves in proximity, we're erasing all of the Black people that are within that identity. And that identity was built by governments, by states, to classify a group of people that were colonized. And so there's so many Black people throughout the diaspora that would identify as Latinx or are identified by the government as Latinx. And so I think it's important to name that we're talking about Black people. And when we're talking about Latinx migrants that are being impacted in this moment, we're talking about disproportionately Black Latinx migrants that are being impacted. And that's one of the reasons why immigration is not just an issue that is not a Black issue. Immigration is a Black issue.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you a little bit about that too. I think what we're seeing in media coverage is this very aggressive attack on people who look quintessentially brown, and this sort of narrative that this is primarily and only affecting these people. And I think you make such an important distinction there, because when people think Black migrants, they think Haitian, they think Jamaican, and these are some of the stories we're seeing being boosted the most on the algorithm, but there's just so many more pockets that I think are even more prone to being victimized by this aggressive system because there's no light shining on them. So can you talk to us a little bit more about you gave us the preference, like Latinx folks are Black.
I think it's important to name that 40% of this country's migrant population are Black Latinx migrants. And so, I think we can name the Caribbean folks, we can name the folks from the continent that are here, but we also have to include South Americans. We also have to include the whole encompassing of migrant folks that are Black and the issues that they are being impacted by.
Yeah. So what I feel you saying, at least from our side of the conversation or Black community side of the conversation, there's a level of ignorance that prevents us from wrapping our arms around Latinx communities that are also Black. But would you also say there's this looming idea that proximity to whiteness on the other side also contributes to the disconnect between communities? Do you see that at work? Okay.
Absolutely. I think that we all are, by being born and living in a white supremacist society, a society built on anti-blackness, built on chattel slavery, built on the colonization of marginalized people to survive. I think that we all have this subconscious underlying bias. And we actually have to do intentional work to try and decolonize some of that behavior. And like colorism, anti-blackness, all of those things. We can have internalized anti-blackness, right? And so I think that Black folks have experienced a series of microaggressions and big macroaggressions around anti-blackness. And those tensions have happened between Black folks and non-Black Latinx folks because we're all also living under racial capitalism. And so I think we can't talk about capitalism and how money is moved and how labor is exploited in this country without talking about race. Like, class is racialized in America. We can't talk about class without talking about race because those two are tethered together. And so, there is a migrant experience that in order to access resources, in order to build a foundation in this country, folks have felt like they had to distance themselves from Blackness because Blackness felt like the ultimate negative or the ultimate anti-thing that you can be. And so people have opted into in alignment with whiteness in order to survive, in order to build resources for their family, in order to build a home, be accepted into a community. Like, I'm not a dangerous migrant. I'm not I'm not a criminal. I'm not a thug. All of these things are microaggressions about how people have villainized Blackness, especially in America, but throughout the diaspora. And so I think that absolutely what Black people are naming is the aggression, the anti-Black aggressions that we have felt for decades and for centuries. And in this moment, if we are acknowledging that we have to actually build alignment between different racial groups and even Black Latinx folks that you have experienced anti-Blackness from, because there's internalized anti-Blackness because of colonization. We have to actually identify, like, that's what it is. And just name it that way and still make an effort to build bridges and acknowledge what colonialism has done to our connection with each other.
I would agree, and I'm not necessarily pushing back on what you said, but I do want to offer some additional context to this thing that I feel like you were saying at the top of your answer. We're all we're put into this system, and so white supremacy is going to affect us in multiple ways inherently. But what I will say is, coming up, what I've been socialized to believe is that any attitudes around anti-Blackness from Latino communities come from primarily Mexican communities. And I'm not saying any of this is right. I'm telling you how I was socialized and how sometimes narratives can be incorrect and spun to create divisiveness within communities. But Mexican Americans who come and do whatever sort of labor, and the idea is that Black Americans are lazy. And want to distance themselves from us from that reason. But interestingly enough, in educating myself for this topic, what I see in the polls is that the majority of Latinos, Latinx Americans that voted for Trump with this same ideology of proximity to whiteness were Cuban Americans. And sort of understanding that the colorism and caste system in the Latino community also is indicative of how much anti-Blackness is actually circulated and what kind it is. So, it's not to discount or invalidate anybody's personal experience, but these are just stories that become the cultural conscious that we just take and run with. And I say that to say, not only does white supremacy bake in this sort of anti-Blackness, but it also causes all of us to live in these silos of our individualized problems and experiences and project that onto other groups without having that conversation. So to your point, and I think to the point of this episode, what we're trying to do is make sure we talk to each other more so we can figure out what's going on.
And doesn't that sound like capitalism? Like, literally, I am going to exploit all of these workers, Black workers, brown workers, but I also, in order for me to get rich, in order for me to become a billionaire, and then I use my money to control different political directions and control political power in this country. But to go back to capitalism, the exploitation of labor, I am exploiting these Black and brown folks. I have to tell them a narrative about each other. I have to enforce that narrative and make it a cultural norm so that they don't ever band together and overthrow the boss at the top.
Yeah.
I have to tell them stories about each other that distance them in proximity. I even have to build stories so that they antagonize each other within their communities. And those stories are usually anchored in anti-blackness, are anchored in white supremacy, of course. And so you've got a Latinx community villainizing anybody who's dark-skinned, anybody who's black, anybody who's Afro-Latinx. And then you have black folks even sustaining white supremacy and anti-blackness within black communities and black culture. Anybody who's dark-skinned, anybody who is the core understanding of what blackness is primarily is villainized. The understanding of like black survival being like thugs, this idea that we were lazy. Now we have to prove them wrong. So what does that slide us into? Being exploited, our labor being exploited, because we have to work twice as hard for half of what anybody else has.
So let's take a couple steps back. Before we get out of here, I want to talk to you about the urgency for everybody to get active. And I want to preface this by saying, for my 92%ers who believe that voting was all you needed to do, and once you got slapped in the face for what you believe should be the last time you're sitting back and you're just watching people's experience consequences for their actions, that's who I'm speaking to in this moment. It's not that simple. And what they want you to do is quit. What they want you to do is feel discouraged to the point that you don't have, what's the word you were using earlier?
Compassion.
Compassion.
Empathy.
Empathy. Yeah. And I feel like I don't want to mix your words because you said it so beautifully, but we were talking about white supremacy again. But one of its designs is to strip us from the ability to access that for one another. Yeah.
One of my favorite things about Black women is the inherent compassion that feels like coded into the technology of Black women, just inherently. Like, this country and this world has been built on and has maintained itself on the back of Black women's compassion. And it absolutely is very human and makes sense that Black women are tired. Yes, absolutely. There are ways that Black women have held communities together, have held the very fiber of democracy together when other folks opted out. And we are seeing in this political moment a lot of propaganda on Instagram, on TikTok. One of the things that I see is folks following wellness accounts, athletic accounts, Pilates accounts, and falling into this rabbit hole that gets them into like white supremacist messaging, far-right MAGA messaging and things like that. And they just started looking recipes up, or like trad wife, house hacks. There's so much propaganda being pushed out by right-wing conservatives to trap our human people that are just doing everyday things. And one of those pieces of propaganda want to untether Black women from compassion, want to untether Black women from their empathy. We heard Elon Musk say one of the things that we need to bring back in America is apathy. They want to disconnect you from your compassion so that when you see people being shuffled into concentration camps, you say, oh, that's not my problem because it's not impacting me. And if we sit silent, if we sit and detach or opt out, we will see our people, our loved ones shuffle, our community, our neighbors be exploited and killed all the way until it gets to us.
Yeah.
And so we can't afford as a people to opt out in this moment. The future of this country, the future of this world depends on people opting into their humanity, opting into their compassion.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is organize other folks, organize folks outside of Black women's identity to opt in. But we can't afford, I'm telling you, the conservative right is telling Black women, aren't you tired?
Ooh.
Don't you want to sit down?
Sinister.
You saw that during a march? You don't gotta go. You don't have to go. They're confronting their local elected officials. That's not your problem, you voted. That's all you had to do. Just sit back while we get the Supreme Court to open up a pathway to gut and destroy the Department of Education. What? Just sit back. Don't worry about it. Just mind your business. That's propaganda. And we have a responsibility to see through it.
Yeah.
So I want Black women to get care.
Yeah.
I want Black women to get rest, to get time to rejuvenate, to get access to health, wellness, and resources. And I want to stand shoulder to shoulder with Black women as we fight for the future of our communities and our world.
Yeah. And what you really bring me to is the remembrance and realization that, I say this often, like my stand-up shows, wherever I'm in spaces where I get to talk to people, especially religious ones, Black women and queer folk have always been the grass and the roots.
Okay.
And in some of the most iconic civil disobedience demonstrations across the annals of history have been planned, orchestrated, organized, and fueled by the work of Black women and queer folk. And you just gave me a light bulb of my own to say, like, wow, making us tap out makes the movement weaker. And
my God.
It's great. Like, we're No Kings movement, 50-51 protests. We're so glad white folks are getting outside. We're so glad white folks are getting active and talking back. Do that. And I think I'm a part of the 92% that wants them to primarily take on the things that puts our bodies in the most harm.
Exactly.
Like, you can put yourself on the front lines, but there are things that we can do to make sure we're still involved, because, like I said, if we tap out, the movement shrinks in effectiveness.
Absolutely.
And we can't let them trick us into being exhausted. But thank you so much for your words. Thank you for your expertise and your real world experience. Thank you for the work that you do with Dream Defenders. Tell everybody over there we said what's up.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate them for sending you over.
Absolutely.
All right, y'all. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The People's Brief. Tonight, we're tackling the tough topic of voters' remorse in the Latino community. Some alarming stats. Nearly 40% of Latino voters have expressed regret over their vote in the last election, citing concerns over immigration reform, economic opportunities, and access to health care. But what do the people really think? Let's take it to the streets and find out. I'm handing it off to our in-the-field reporter, Hood Anchor Ye. Ye, what's the word?
Hey, Lynae, this Hood Anchor Ye. I'm out here on Buford Highway trying to see how the people feel about voters' remorse and ICE raids. What's the worst advice you got about voting?
The worst piece of advice that I've gotten about voting...
I don't have an answer for that.
The worst advice I got about voting was that it wouldn't make a difference. I heard that from some friends and coworkers, that even if you did vote for the lesser of two evils, it wouldn't make a difference, that our vote wouldn't count.
If you don't agree with either of the candidates' issues, I've heard some people tell me to simply not vote.
Have you or anybody you know been affected by the ICE raids?
Actually, my family, my father-in-law actually just picked up off a traffic citation, a failure to stop at a stop sign. And now he's been in Stewart for about 2 months now. It sucks, because he got sons and daughters, grandkids. He's a really, really good guy, man, not a criminal at all. A lot of people know him. Just giving a shout out to Solomon Naranjo. We're out here fighting for you, man. Every day, your daughter's fighting really hard for you. We're doing our best for you, man. And not only for you, for every Hispanic, every immigrant, anybody. Nobody's left out, man.
Oh, and affected in my friends and families. The ICE affected too much for chasing to them, around for shopping or for go to work. They don't let it feel free.
I have been affected by the ICE raids, and it has affected the way I see things right now. I've seen plenty of people that are undocumented be scared to just go out. And, they don't want to even just go grocery shopping. They don't want to just go out and have fun. They're terrified that anything could happen to them at any moment. And I think that's very unfair. A lot of people that thought they were doing the right thing, very, conservative Catholic Christian people, are starting to see that this was not the right choice for our country. I've also met plenty of people that are pro-Trump, that are Latinos, and do not regret their vote because for some reason they believe that they are superior to the rest of us. They believe that they are equal to the same people that don't want them here, which is, not true. They want everybody out.
Would you vote for two lesser evils, or would you just stay home and just watch Netflix?
I stay home.
I feel like I voted for the lesser of two evils. I voted for Kamala Harris, and even though I didn't agree with everything she had in plan, I still think she was the better choice for all of us.
To be honest, man, at this point, I feel like I'll just stay home and watch Netflix.
If I could go back in time, I would vote for Kamala Harris again. I don't have any regrets. It's unfortunate that the results turned out the way that they did, but I at least can live without feeling guilt.
So I believe that a lot of people didn't know what they were getting themselves into with this election. A lot of people a lot of Latinos have very conservative points of view, and they believe this was the right choice, especially based on their faith, based on their culture. I know plenty of people that voted for Trump that some of them regret it, some of them don't, based on their faith.
My thoughts on why certain Latinos voted for Trump over Kamala Harris is because I think that they genuinely didn't believe the broader issues at stake and how the Trump administration's policies would affect our own communities.